For months, the conversation around Shedeur Sanders seemed dominated by one loud message: anybody but him. Critics questioned whether he was ready, analysts debated if another quarterback would be a better fit, and some voices in the media openly pushed the idea that the Cleveland Browns should look elsewhere. The narrative built momentum online, with fans labeling the critics as part of an anybody but Shedeur campaign. But now, that entire storyline appears to be unraveling. Reports coming out of Cleveland suggest the Browns are not only comfortable with Sanders, they're excited about him. Insiders say the organization is prepared to move forward with him as QB1, a shift that has caught many of his doubters off guard. Suddenly, the same voices that questioned whether he deserved a chance are being forced to confront a new reality. And that's where things start to get interesting. Because the Browns' decision doesn't just silence the criticism, it raises a much bigger question about what the team really sees in Shedeur Sanders. Long before Shedeur Sanders was even close to taking control of the quarterback room in Cleveland, the debate around him had already exploded. The moment his name started being seriously connected to the Cleveland Browns, the reactions from certain corners of the sports media were immediate, and in many cases, skeptical. Some analysts questioned whether Sanders had truly earned the hype surrounding him. Others argued that the Browns should be exploring completely different options at quarterback. The criticism didn't just stay behind closed doors either. It spilled onto talk shows, podcasts, and social media, where the conversation quickly turned into a heated back-and-forth between fans and media personalities. One of the most talked-about voices in that discussion was longtime Browns reporter Mary Kay Cabot. Over time, fans began associating her commentary with the growing skepticism surrounding Sanders. While reports and interviews often focused on the team exploring multiple quarterback possibilities, some fans interpreted the coverage as part of a broader push against the idea of Sanders leading the franchise. Online, the reaction was intense. Supporters of Sanders began labeling the criticism as part of an anybody but Shedeur movement. According to many fans, it felt like Sanders was being judged before he even had the opportunity to prove himself on the field. Every rumor, every draft discussion, and every quarterback comparison seemed to fuel the narrative that some people simply didn't want him to succeed in Cleveland. And the skepticism wasn't limited to just one reporter. Several analysts across the NFL media landscape questioned whether Sanders' style of play would translate smoothly to the professional level. Some argued that the Browns should prioritize a different type of quarterback, someone with more traditional NFL experience or a different developmental path. But as the debates continued, something interesting started to happen. Inside the Browns organization, the tone reportedly sounded very different. Instead of hesitating about Sanders, reports suggested the team was actually intrigued by his potential. Coaches and front office figures appeared willing to evaluate what he could bring to the offense rather than dismissing the idea outright. That contrast created an even bigger divide between the media narrative and what might have been happening behind the scenes. For fans following the story closely, the situation started to feel almost like two separate realities. On one side, there were the public discussions questioning Sanders' readiness. On the other side, there were signs that the Browns themselves might be preparing to give him a real opportunity. And once those internal signals began leaking out, the entire conversation started to shift. Because if the Browns truly believed in Shedeur Sanders, then the critics who had pushed the anybody but him argument would suddenly find themselves in an uncomfortable position. The debate would no longer be about whether Sanders deserved a chance. It would be about whether the organization made the right call trusting him. But that was only the beginning of the story. Because as the Browns' plans started becoming clearer, the ripple effects would extend far beyond just one quarterback decision. For a long time, the outside narrative suggested the Cleveland Browns were still searching for their next quarterback. Rumors swirled about draft prospects, veteran options, and potential competition in the quarterback room. From the outside looking in, it seemed like the team was keeping every possible option open. But then something started to change. Gradually, reports and comments coming from people close to the organization began painting a very different picture, one where Shedeur Sanders wasn't just another option on the list. Instead, he appeared to be the player the Browns were genuinely interested in developing as their leader under center. According to several discussions and interviews circulating in the media, the Browns have expressed real excitement about Sanders' potential. Insiders have suggested that the coaching staff sees traits in him that could translate well to the NFL. His confidence, leadership style, and ability to command an offense reportedly caught the attention of people inside the building. That's a major shift from the earlier public conversation. For months, the debate focused on whether Sanders was even the right type of quarterback for Cleveland. Some critics believed the Browns would eventually pivot toward a more established veteran or target another highly touted prospect in the draft. But the signals now coming out of the organization suggest something different. The Browns may actually want to see what Sanders can do before making any drastic changes. And that strategy says a lot. Instead of rushing to bring in a quarterback specifically designed to challenge him, reports indicate the team could focus on adding a developmental player instead. That kind of move would provide depth without immediately threatening Sanders' position as the potential starter. In other words, the Browns might be preparing to give him the runway to prove himself. That approach also explains some of the team's recent pre-draft evaluations. The Browns are still doing their due diligence on several quarterbacks in the upcoming class, something every NFL team does during the draft process. Prospects like Ty Simpson have reportedly been evaluated by the organization as part of their normal scouting routine. But there's an important distinction. Evaluating prospects doesn't necessarily mean the Browns are searching for Sanders' replacement. In fact, many analysts believe the team is simply preparing for different draft scenarios in case a quarterback with developmental upside becomes available later in the process. And if that's the case, it would reinforce the idea that Sanders is currently viewed as the player the Browns want to build around. That possibility has caught many observers off guard. Just weeks ago, much of the public conversation centered around whether Sanders would even have a real opportunity in Cleveland. Now, the narrative appears to be shifting toward a completely different question. What happens if the Browns truly commit to him as their starting quarterback? Because once a team makes that decision, everything else begins to revolve around it, from roster construction to offensive strategy. And if these early signals are accurate, the Browns may already be moving in that direction. But if Sanders really is the centerpiece of the plan, it raises another major question that could reshape the entire quarterback room. Because when one player rises to QB1 status, someone else inevitably gets pushed out of the picture. Once it started becoming clear that the Cleveland Browns were seriously considering moving forward with Shedeur Sanders as QB1, another issue immediately surfaced. What happens to everyone else in the quarterback room? Because in the NFL, when a team chooses its starting quarterback, it rarely affects just one player. It creates a ripple effect across the entire roster. Reports and discussions around the Browns suggest the team is still evaluating how the rest of the quarterback depth chart should look if Sanders takes control of the offense. According to insiders and analysts, the Browns are likely to add at least one more quarterback before the season begins. But the key detail is the type of quarterback they may be targeting. Instead of bringing in a high-profile veteran who could immediately challenge Sanders for the starting role, many believe the team is leaning toward a developmental option. That kind of move would provide depth and future potential without disrupting the current plan. And that's where things get interesting. Some reports suggest that if the Browns do add another quarterback, certain players already on the roster could become trade candidates. One name that has occasionally surfaced in conversations is Dillon Gabriel. While nothing is confirmed, speculation online has suggested the team could explore moving him if they decide to reshape the quarterback room. Of course, it's important to note that these possibilities remain speculative. Teams constantly evaluate roster options during the offseason, and rumors often circulate as part of that process. Still, the mere discussion highlights how much the Browns' quarterback situation could shift if Sanders is firmly established as the starter. At the same time, the Browns continue to scout quarterbacks entering the draft. Prospects like Ty Simpson have reportedly been evaluated during the team's pre-draft process. But evaluating players during draft season doesn't necessarily mean the team plans to replace Sanders. More often, it simply means they want to be prepared if an intriguing prospect becomes available later in the draft. That approach is fairly common across the NFL. Even teams with established starters frequently draft developmental quarterbacks who can learn behind the scenes while preparing for future opportunities. But in Cleveland's case, the timing of these evaluations has sparked even more debate among fans. Supporters of Sanders see the situation as proof that the Browns are building around him while still preparing for the long term. Critics, on the other hand, argue that the team could still pivot if another quarterback unexpectedly becomes available. And that tension has only fueled the conversation. Because once the Browns officially commit to Sanders as their starting quarterback, the entire structure of the quarterback room will likely revolve around that decision. Backup roles, developmental prospects, and potential trades will all depend on how firmly the organization believes in him. In other words, this isn't just about nomming a starter. It's about shaping the future of the franchise. And if the Browns truly believe Shedeur Sanders is the quarterback who can lead them forward, then the moves that follow could trigger a chain reaction that reshapes the entire roster. While the spotlight has been locked on who will lead the offense, another battle has been unfolding quietly behind the scenes inside the Cleveland Browns front office. And it has nothing to do with touchdowns or highlight plays. It's about money, strategy, and a complicated financial puzzle that every NFL team has to solve. Because in today's NFL, building a competitive roster isn't just about finding talented players, it's about mastering the salary cap. The league's salary cap continues to rise almost every year, and smart front offices have learned how to use that to their advantage. Instead of treating contracts as fixed numbers, teams now regularly restructure deals to create more flexibility. By converting parts of a player's salary into bonuses and spreading the cost across future seasons, teams can free up millions of dollars in immediate cap space. And the Browns have become known as one of the teams that understands this system extremely well. Over the past several years, Cleveland's front office has used restructures to open financial breathing room while keeping their core players on the roster. For example, contracts involving star players like Deshaun Watson and Denzel Ward have reportedly been adjusted in ways that help the team manage its cap situation. Moves like these don't necessarily reduce the overall money owed to a player, but they allow the team to push certain costs into the future. And that strategy has become incredibly common across the league. Even superstar quarterbacks like Patrick Mahomes have had their contracts restructured multiple times. In Mahomes' case, restructures have allowed the Kansas City Chiefs to continue building competitive rosters around him while still honoring his massive deal. The Browns appear to be operating with a similar mindset. By creating extra financial flexibility now, the team positions itself to make aggressive moves when opportunities appear. That could mean signing a veteran player in free agency, making a surprise trade, or strengthening key areas of the roster. And if the Browns are serious about building around Shedeur Sanders, that financial flexibility becomes even more important. Young quarterbacks often perform best when they're supported by strong offensive lines and reliable playmakers. That means the Browns may need to invest in protecting Sanders and giving him targets to throw to. But those kinds of roster upgrades require cap space, and that's where the financial strategy becomes critical. In many ways, managing the salary cap is like playing a long-term chess match. Every move made today affects what options will be available tomorrow. Restructure too many contracts and you could face problems later, but manage the numbers carefully. And you can create opportunities that other teams simply can't afford. The Browns seem determined to stay ahead of that curve. Reports suggest the team could still have additional restructures available if they need to open even more cap space later. In other words, the financial maneuvering might not be finished yet. And that possibility matters. Because if Cleveland suddenly decides to add a major piece to the roster, whether through free agency or a blockbuster trade, they may already have the financial tools in place to make it happen. But that raises another intriguing question. If the Browns have created all this flexibility, where exactly will they use it? Because the next big move could reveal just how serious the organization is about building a team capable of winning right now. If the Cleveland Browns are truly preparing to move forward with Shedeur Sanders as the centerpiece of their offense, then the next step becomes obvious: build the right team around him. Because in the NFL, even the most talented quarterbacks can struggle if the roster around them isn't built for success. Protection, reliable receivers, and a stable offensive system can often determine whether a young quarterback thrives or collapses under pressure. And according to discussions coming from analysts and insiders, the Browns appear to understand that reality. One of the biggest areas of focus could be the offensive line. Over the past few seasons, Cleveland has dealt with injuries and depth issues up front, and that can be a nightmare for any quarterback, especially a young one trying to establish himself as a leader. Reports suggest the Browns could look to bring in experienced offensive linemen either through free agency or potential trades. The goal would be simple: give Sanders time in the pocket and reduce the number of hits he takes during games. But protecting the quarterback is only part of the equation. Another major priority could be adding more weapons in the passing game. Modern NFL offenses rely heavily on explosive receivers who can create separation and turn short passes into big plays. If Sanders becomes the starting quarterback, the Browns may look for additional playmakers who can help stretch the field and make the offense more dangerous. That could come through several different routes. The Browns could target veteran wide receivers in free agency, players who already understand the speed and complexity of the NFL. Bringing in an experienced receiver would not only give Sanders another reliable target, but could also help stabilize the offense while younger players continue developing. At the same time, the draft always offers intriguing opportunities. Each year, talented receivers and offensive linemen enter the league with the potential to make an immediate impact. Cleveland's front office could decide to invest in young talent that grows alongside Sanders, creating a long-term foundation for the offense. And this is where the Browns' earlier financial moves could play an important role. By restructuring contracts and managing their salary cap carefully, the organization has reportedly created flexibility that allows them to pursue roster upgrades if the right opportunity appears. That means Cleveland could potentially make a significant move if a high-impact offensive player becomes available. Of course, none of these moves are guaranteed. Off-season strategies often shift depending on how the draft unfolds, which players hit the market, and how teams evaluate their own rosters. Still, the direction of the conversation seems clear. If Sanders truly becomes QB1, the Browns' next moves will likely focus on strengthening the offense around him. A stronger offensive line would provide protection, while additional receiving threats could give him more options downfield. Together, those pieces could transform the Browns' offensive identity. And that's why the upcoming roster decisions could be just as important as the quarterback decision itself, because naming a starting quarterback is only the first step. What happens next will determine whether the Browns are simply experimenting with a new leader or building a system designed to help him succeed. For months, the conversation surrounding Shedeur Sanders seemed locked into a single storyline. Critics questioned whether he was truly ready for the NFL spotlight, analysts debated if another quarterback would be a safer option, and parts of the sports media appeared hesitant to fully embrace the idea of him leading the Cleveland Browns offense. But recently, that narrative has started to shift. As reports and discussions began suggesting that the Browns were seriously considering Sanders as their QB1, the tone of the conversation slowly began to change. The same debates that once centered around whether he should even get a chance started evolving into a different question entirely. What if the Browns actually believe he's the right guy? That shift didn't happen overnight. At first, the idea seemed almost surprising to some observers. For weeks, the public conversation had focused heavily on alternative quarterback options. Draft prospects were discussed. Veteran signings were floated as possibilities. Analysts speculated about different directions Cleveland could take. But once insiders started indicating that the organization was excited about Sanders' potential, the entire discussion began to feel different. Suddenly, the attention wasn't just on whether Sanders could succeed, it was on why the Browns might believe in him. Fans online were quick to notice the change. Many supporters of Sanders pointed out that earlier criticism now seemed out of step with the direction Cleveland might be heading. Social media discussions exploded with debates about whether some analysts had underestimated him too quickly. In many ways, the story became less about one player and more about the broader battle between public opinion and organizational decisions. Because in professional sports, those two forces don't always align. Media analysts evaluate players based on scouting reports, statistics, and comparisons to past prospects. Teams, on the other hand, spend months studying players behind the scenes, interviewing them, analyzing their work ethic, and evaluating how they might fit into a specific system. Sometimes those evaluations lead to very different conclusions. If the Browns truly believe Sanders has the leadership, confidence, and skill set to guide their offense, then their decision could challenge the narrative that had been building around him. And that's where the tension comes from. Because once a team commits to a quarterback, the debate doesn't stop, it simply changes direction. Critics begin watching even more closely, looking for signs that confirm their earlier doubts. Supporters, meanwhile, view every positive development as proof that the organization made the right call. For Sanders, that means the spotlight will only grow brighter. Every practice report, preseason performance, and early season game will likely be analyzed through the lens of this debate. Was the hype justified? Did the Browns make the correct decision, or were the critics right all along? Those questions won't be answered immediately. But one thing already seems clear: the narrative surrounding Shedeur Sanders is evolving. What once looked like a wave of skepticism is gradually turning into something far more complicated. And as the Browns continue shaping their roster and preparing for the season, the conversation around Sanders may be just getting started. At the center of all the debate, speculation, and shifting narratives stands one player, Shedeur Sanders. And if the reports and signals coming from the Cleveland Browns are accurate, then Sanders may be stepping into one of the most challenging roles in professional football, the starting quarterback of a franchise searching for stability. Because being named QB1 in the NFL is never just about talent, it's about expectations. For years, the Browns have been trying to solve their quarterback puzzle. Different players have come and gone, each one carrying the hope that they might finally be the answer. Some showed flashes of promise, while others struggled under the intense pressure that comes with leading a team desperate for success. Now, Sanders could be the next name added to that story. And the expectations surrounding him are already massive. Supporters believe he has the confidence, leadership, and playmaking ability to thrive in the spotlight. His college career showed flashes of the type of quarterback who can command an offense and energize teammates. Fans who have followed his journey believe he brings a unique swagger and composure that could translate well to the NFL level. But the other side of the conversation hasn't disappeared. Critics who questioned Sanders earlier are still watching closely. For them, the upcoming season may feel like the ultimate test. If he performs well, the narrative surrounding him could completely change. Those early doubts could fade as the focus shifts to his development and growth. But if things don't go smoothly, the critics will likely point back to the concerns that started this entire debate. And that's the reality of being QB1. Every throw, every decision, and every game will be analyzed in detail. The spotlight that once focused on rumors and speculation will shift directly onto Sanders' performance on the field. But pressure can create opportunity. Many of the NFL's greatest quarterbacks faced skepticism early in their careers. Some were doubted by analysts, questioned by fans, or overlooked by critics who believed they wouldn't succeed at the professional level. Yet those same players eventually proved that confidence, preparation, and resilience could change the narrative. For Sanders, the upcoming chapter could define his career. If he embraces the challenge and performs at a high level, he could become the leader Cleveland has been searching for. A strong start could energize the fan base, silence critics, and reshape the conversation that has surrounded him for months. But even beyond wins and losses, his journey will likely become one of the most closely watched storylines in football. Because the moment a quarterback becomes QB1, the story stops being about potential. It becomes about proof. And for Shedeur Sanders, the next time he steps onto the field wearing a Browns uniform, the debate that once dominated headlines may finally begin to settle itself, one play at a time.